The wind carried no mercy that night. It slipped silently through the ancient oak trees, lifting brittle autumn leaves into the air before scattering them across the empty pathways of the city park like forgotten pages from lives no one cared to remember. The world around the park never stopped moving. Cars rushed through distant streets. Neon lights shimmered across rain-soaked sidewalks. People hurried home with warm dinners waiting on their tables. Families laughed. Children slept peacefully. Lovers walked hand in hand beneath glowing streetlights. Yet in one forgotten corner of the park, time itself seemed to have stopped. Beneath the weakest street lamp sat an old man. Alone, silent, almost invisible. His coat had once been brown. Now it was nothing more than faded fabric stitched together by countless desperate repairs. His hands trembled uncontrollably beneath fingerless gloves. His shoes were cracked so badly that the freezing ground touched his feet through the holes. Every breath escaped his lips like pale smoke. The cold wasn't simply surrounding him. It was consuming him. Beside the bench rested a battered leather suitcase. The leather had peeled away decades ago. The brass locks were rusted. One handle had been repaired with worn-out rope. Inside the suitcase were almost no possessions. No money. No valuables. No spare clothes. Only memories. Resting carefully on top of the suitcase was a single yellow envelope. Its paper had aged into the color of old ivory. Its edges had curled with time. Rain had stained it. Sunlight had faded it. Years had almost erased the ink. Almost. The old man's trembling fingers gently brushed across the envelope, as though touching the face of someone he had loved his entire life. He protected it more carefully than he protected himself, because everything he had left in this world was inside. A young couple walked past. The woman glanced toward the bench. Those. She lowered her voice. Another homeless man. Her boyfriend barely looked. They're everywhere lately. They kept walking. An elderly businessman slowed his pace. He frowned with disgust. City should clean this place up. A teenager secretly recorded the old man with his phone before laughing with his friends. None of them wondered why the old man sat there. None of them asked his name. None of them imagined that history itself was quietly sitting on that bench. The old man lifted his tired eyes toward the empty sky. Clouds covered every star. His lips moved almost silently. Please. His voice cracked. Just let him remember. A single tear rolled into the deep lines of his weathered face. Then, heavy footsteps echoed through the darkness. Deliberate, confident, authoritative. Officer Daniel Harper had worked this neighborhood for almost 15 years. He believed rules existed for one reason: to be obeyed. He noticed the old man from across the park. Again, the same bench, the same night, the same month, every year. He sighed with irritation. Not him again. His flashlight pierced the darkness. The bright beam landed directly across the old man's face. There you are. The old man slowly blinked. He already knew that voice. He had heard it before. Many times. I'm sorry. His voice was weak. I'll leave soon. No. The officer stepped closer. You're leaving now. I only need. You need nothing. The flashlight swept across the suitcase, then toward the envelope, then back to the old man's face. You've been warned. The old man carefully reached for the envelope. Please, I won't stay much longer. Officer Harper folded his arms. You've been saying that every year. The old man's eyes quietly drifted toward the bench beside him. Every year. Exactly the same date. Exactly the same place. Exactly the same time. For 50 long years. The officer's patience disappeared. He grabbed the old man's arm. I said get up. Pain shot through the old man's body. His legs no longer belonged to a young man. His knees shook violently as he tried standing. He almost succeeded. Then his balance failed. The suitcase slipped sideways. It struck the pavement with a dull crack. The yellow envelope floated gently through the air. Before landing several feet away, the old man's face changed instantly. Fear. Real fear. The kind that cannot be acted. No. He reached toward it. His fingers scraped the pavement. Please. Before he could reach it, Officer Harper casually nudged the envelope with the tip of his boot. It slid across the wet concrete. The old man's breathing stopped. Please don't. The officer frowned. What? It's just an old letter. The old man stared at the envelope as though someone had pointed a gun at his child. Please. His voice broke. Don't damage it. People slowly gathered. Curiosity spread faster than compassion. A mother pulled her son closer. Don't stare. But she stared herself. Two teenagers whispered. Probably drunk. Another man shook his head. This city has become a mess. Someone laughed. He should be grateful the officer is even talking to him. No one asked if he was cold. No one offered a blanket. No one bent down to pick up the envelope. Compassion had become something people watched, instead of something they practiced. Officer Harper sighed impatiently. Enough. Metal clicked. Handcuffs unfolded beneath the streetlight. If you refuse to leave. He stepped forward. I'll arrest you. The old man looked neither frightened nor angry. Instead, he closed his eyes, as though surrendering to something far older than the officer standing before him. Quietly, almost too quietly to hear, he whispered, I've waited 50 years. The officer blinked. What did you say? I've waited. The old man swallowed. 50 years. The officer laughed loudly. The crowd joined him. You've been waiting 50 years. For who? A king. The old man's tired eyes slowly opened. A faint smile appeared. No. For a promise. The officer smirked. Well, I think your prince forgot. Another wave of laughter rolled through the crowd. The old man never answered. Instead, he looked toward the park entrance, exactly as he had done every single year. Every year he had arrived before sunset. Every year he had left after midnight. Every year carrying the same suitcase. Every year carrying the same letter. Because once, half a century earlier, a frightened teenage boy had stood in front of him with tears in his eyes, unsure whether he should give up on music forever. That boy had believed nobody believed in him. The old man had changed that, with only a few sentences and one handwritten letter. No newspaper had written about it. No cameras had captured it. History had quietly walked away. But the old man had never forgotten. He had made only one request. When the world knows your name, don't forget mine. The boy had smiled, then made a promise. I never will. 50 years. Millions of records sold. Thousands of concerts. Standing ovations. Private jets. Golden microphones. Television interviews. Worldwide fame. Yet the old man had returned. Every single year. Not to ask for money. Not to ask for fame. Not even to ask for help. Only to discover whether promises still existed in a world that had forgotten how to keep them. Officer Harper grabbed his wrist again. This ends tonight. He pulled harder. The old man's body nearly collapsed. The crowd watched. Phones recorded. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then, far beyond the iron gates, the deep growl of a powerful engine echoed through the cold night. A long black Cadillac rolled silently to a stop beneath the towering trees. Its headlights faded. The driver's door opened. One polished black shoe touched the pavement. Then another. A tall figure stepped out wearing a long black overcoat that swayed gently in the autumn wind. His collar was turned upward. A black hat shadowed part of his face. There were no bodyguards, no photographers, no screaming fans. Tonight, he wanted only silence. He began walking through the park alone. Slow, calm, unknown to almost everyone around him. He had walked this park many times when the weight of fame became too heavy to carry. Tonight was supposed to be no different. Until a desperate voice reached his ears. Please, don't touch that letter. The man stopped walking. Something inside him tightened. Not because of the words, because of the voice. It was old, fragile, broken by time, yet hauntingly familiar. He slowly lifted his head. His eyes searched through the crowd. Then he saw the battered suitcase. His heartbeat stumbled. He saw the yellow envelope. His breathing became uneven. Then he saw the old man's face. Wrinkled, thin, almost unrecognizable. But the eyes, those eyes, the same gentle eyes that had looked into his soul half a century earlier. The color drained from his face. His heart pounded so violently he could hear it over the wind. One memory exploded through his mind like lightning. And in that single instant, Elvis Presley realized that the man the entire park believed was just another homeless stranger, was the very first person who had ever believed in him. For several endless seconds, no one moved. The cold wind continued to sweep across the park, but it no longer mattered. The laughter disappeared. The whispers faded. Even the traffic beyond the iron gates seemed to fall silent. Every pair of eyes turned toward the tall man in the long black overcoat. Officer Daniel Harper frowned. "What are you doing, sir?" The stranger didn't answer. He simply stared at the old man. His breathing grew heavier with every step. The years, the concerts, the screaming crowds, the awards, the fame, everything around him suddenly dissolved into nothing. He was no longer the king of rock and roll. He was no longer the most recognizable face in America. He was no longer Elvis Presley. For one impossible moment, he was once again the frightened young boy from Memphis who had believed his dream was already over. His polished shoes stopped only a few feet from the trembling old man. The old man slowly lifted his head. Their eyes met. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Half a century of memories stood silently between them. The old man's lips trembled. He searched the stranger's face carefully, almost afraid to believe what his heart was already telling him. Then, a faint smile appeared. So, he whispered, "You came." Elvis could no longer hold back the tears gathering in his eyes. His voice cracked. "I should have come years ago." The old man gently shook his head. "No, you came exactly when you were supposed to." Officer Harper looked from one man to the other, completely confused. "Excuse me," he interrupted. "Do you actually know this man?" Elvis slowly turned toward the officer. There was sadness in his eyes, but there was also something stronger. Respect. The kind of respect that cannot be bought with fame or fortune. "Know him," Elvis repeated softly. "I owe him my entire life." The crowd murmured. Someone whispered, "What did he say?" Another person stepped closer. Phones that had been recording a homeless man were now recording Elvis Presley. No one dared speak above a whisper. Officer Harper crossed his arms. "Sir, this man has been sleeping in the park." Elvis looked directly into the officer's eyes. "And what if he has?" The officer hesitated. "That's against the law." Elvis nodded slowly. "I understand." Then his voice became firm. "But before you judge where a man sleeps, ask yourself why he has nowhere left to go." The words struck the crowd harder than anyone expected. Several people quietly lowered their phones. An elderly woman wiped away a tear. A teenage boy who had laughed only moments earlier looked down at the ground in shame. Elvis slowly bent down. Not halfway. Not politely. He dropped to both knees on the cold pavement. A gasp swept through the park. Officer Harper's eyes widened. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Another voice trembled. Did Elvis Presley just kneel before a homeless man? Hundreds of eyes stared in complete disbelief. The king of rock and roll, kneeling before someone everyone else had ignored. The old man's hands shook even harder. "You don't have to do that, son." Elvis smiled through tears. "Yes, I do." His voice broke. "Because 50 years ago, you were the first person who ever made me believe I could stand." Silence. Absolute silence. Even the wind seemed to stop listening. Elvis reached toward the yellow envelope lying on the wet pavement. He picked it up with both hands as though it were made of glass. He carefully brushed away the dirt with the sleeve of his coat. Then, very slowly, he opened it. Inside rested a faded black and white photograph. A much younger Elvis. No famous white jumpsuit. No expensive jewelry. No cheering audience. Just a skinny teenage boy wearing worn jeans, holding an old guitar with nervous hands. Standing beside him, the old man, both of them smiling. Several people leaned forward. No one spoke. Beneath the photograph rested a single folded letter. The paper had yellowed with age. Its folds had nearly torn apart. Elvis unfolded it carefully. His fingers trembled. His eyes filled before he even began reading. The handwriting was faded, but every word remained alive. He read aloud, "Dear Elvis, I know the world has not discovered your voice yet. Maybe it never will. But I have listened carefully. I have heard something that cannot be taught. I have heard honesty. I have heard pain. I have heard hope. Never let rejection become your future. One day millions will sing your songs. One day strangers will know your name. But if that day ever comes, promise me only one thing. Never forget the people who believed in you before the world did. Elvis stopped reading. He could not continue. His vision blurred beneath tears. The old man smiled gently. I never expected you to keep the promise. Elvis looked up immediately. I didn't. The old man blinked. I didn't keep it. His voice cracked with regret. I broke it. The crowd looked at him in confusion. I spent years touring. I crossed oceans. I sang in front of kings. I met presidents. I shook thousands of hands. But somewhere along the way, I lost yours. Tears rolled freely down his face now. I searched for you. I hired people. I asked friends. I even returned to the neighborhood where we first met. But nobody knew where you had gone. The old man chuckled softly. I made sure they wouldn't. Elvis frowned. Why? The old man looked toward the dark sky. Because I never wanted your success to become my reward. I helped a scared young man. I didn't invest in a celebrity. Another wave of silence spread through the crowd. Those words reached places no speech ever could. Officer Harper slowly removed his police cap. For the first time that evening, he felt ashamed. Not because he had enforced the law, but because he had judged a man before learning his story. Elvis stood slowly, still holding the letter against his chest. Then he turned toward the growing crowd. There are people standing here tonight who think success begins on a stage. He slowly shook his head. No, success begins with one person who believes in you before anyone else does. He looked back at the old man. This man was that person for me. A little girl, no older than 8, quietly stepped out from behind her mother. Without saying a word, she walked toward the old man. She removed her own warm scarf, then gently wrapped it around his neck. The old man's eyes widened. Thank you, he whispered. The little girl smiled. My mommy says heroes wear capes. She looked at the scarf. I think this will work. People began crying openly. But none of them realized. The most unforgettable moment of the entire night had not happened yet. Because inside the old suitcase, hidden beneath old clothes and decades of memories, was one final secret. A secret so powerful, it would change everything Elvis believed about his own past. The park had become so quiet that the sound of the wind turning the fallen leaves seemed louder than the voices of the hundreds of people standing there. No one reached for their phone anymore. No one whispered. No one laughed. Every eye was fixed on the worn leather suitcase resting beside the old bench. Elvis slowly knelt once more. His fingers lingered on the cracked handle. The leather was stiff with age. The brass latches were rusted. It looked as though it had not been opened in years. He looked at the old man. May I? The old man smiled gently. I've been waiting half a century for someone to ask me that. With great care, Elvis lifted the lid. A faint scent of old paper and cedar drifted into the cold night air. Inside there were no riches, no stacks of money, no precious jewelry, only a few neatly folded shirts, a worn Bible, a faded photograph, and beneath them, a thick bundle of letters tied together with a blue ribbon that had almost lost its color. Elvis frowned. So many letters. The old man nodded. They're all yours. A murmur swept through the crowd. Elvis carefully untied the ribbon. Every envelope carried the same name. Elvis Presley. Some had never been sealed. Some had been opened and folded again. Others still carried stamps that had yellowed with time but had never been mailed. Elvis looked at him in confusion. You wrote to me. The old man smiled. Every year, every birthday, every Christmas, every time I heard one of your songs on the radio. I wrote another letter. Elvis's voice trembled. But why didn't you send them? The old man lowered his eyes. Because I didn't want to become another person asking you for something. I didn't want your money. I didn't want your fame. I didn't want people saying. He only helped Elvis because he expected something in return. So I kept them. I simply wanted to believe that somewhere. You were still the same young man I once met. Elvis's hands shook as he opened the first letter. It had been written decades earlier. He read aloud. Dear Elvis, today I heard your first record on the radio. I smiled the entire day. Don't worry about becoming famous. Worry about remaining kind. Elvis swallowed hard. He opened another. Dear Elvis, newspapers say you've become the biggest star in America. I hope they never become more important than the people waiting outside your dressing room. Another. Dear Elvis, success has a strange habit. It introduces you to thousands of people, while quietly taking away the few who truly know your heart. Another. Dear Elvis, if the day ever comes when the world applauds louder than your own conscience, walk away from the stage. Your soul is worth more than any standing ovation. By now, Elvis could barely see the pages through his tears. The crowd cried with him. Officer Harper stood perfectly still. The weight of everything he had witnessed pressed heavily upon his heart. The little girl who had wrapped her scarf around the old man's neck quietly took her mother's hand. Mom, she whispered, is he really homeless? Her mother looked at the old man for a long moment, then softly replied, No, sweetheart. I think he's one of the richest men we've ever seen. The old man chuckled. She's right. Everyone turned toward him. I was never poor. I simply spent everything I had believing in people. He looked at Elvis. And somehow, it always made me feel wealthy. Elvis closed the letters. He could no longer speak. Instead, he stood. He removed the keys to his black Cadillac from his coat pocket. He looked at them for a moment, then quietly placed them back. The crowd watched in confusion. Instead, he reached into the inside pocket of his overcoat and removed a small leather checkbook. Without saying a word, he wrote. When he finished, he folded the check, then stopped. Slowly, he tore it in half. The crowd gasped. Elvis smiled through his tears. You can't repay love with money. He placed the torn pieces into his own pocket. Then he turned toward the old man. I almost made the biggest mistake of my life. The old man looked up. I thought I could thank you with something I own. Elvis shook his head. But everything I own exists because of you. He extended both hands. I won't give you a house. I won't give you a car. I won't give you a check. The crowd listened in complete silence. I'm giving you something much greater. My home, my table, my family. If you'll accept, you'll never spend another night alone. The old man's lips trembled. He searched Elvis's face carefully, just as he had done 50 years before. Finally, he smiled. You kept your promise. Elvis nodded. I should have kept it sooner. The old man slowly stood. His legs were weak. Before he could lose his balance, Elvis caught him, not as a celebrity helping a stranger, but as a son embracing the man who had changed the direction of his life. The two stood together beneath the old street lamp. Neither cared who was watching. Officer Harper quietly walked forward. Without speaking, he removed his badge. He held it against his chest. Then, he looked the old man in the eyes. I'm sorry. I judged your clothes before I learned your story. The old man smiled warmly. Son, if people only judged what they could see, the world would never have known Elvis either. The officer lowered his head. For the first time in many years, he cried. One by one, people from the crowd stepped forward. Not with cameras, not with questions, with kindness. A woman removed her coat and draped it over the old man's shoulders. A bakery owner offered warm bread. A taxi driver quietly handed him his business card. If you ever need a ride, it's free. An elderly veteran saluted him. Not because of rank, but because character deserves respect. The little girl hugged him tightly. I hope I remember people the way you do. The old man kissed her gently on the forehead. I hope you never have to wait 50 years to find out. The church bell across the street rang softly. Midnight. The exact moment he had waited for every year. He looked at the bench one final time. Then at Elvis. My waiting is over. Together, they walked toward the park gate, not in front of each other, side by side. As they disappeared into the night, the wind carried away the last of the fallen leaves. Behind them, the old bench remained empty, but somehow, it no longer looked lonely. Because everyone standing there had learned something that no concert, no award, and no fortune could ever teach. A person's greatest achievement is not becoming someone the whole world remembers. It is becoming someone who never forgets the people who believed in them before anyone else did. And on that unforgettable night, the people who had entered the park expecting to witness a homeless man being arrested, left having witnessed something far greater. They witnessed a promise, strong enough to survive 50 years. A promise that outlived fame. A promise that proved true greatness is measured not by applause, but by gratitude.